It was 3 a.m. when Ibrahim Traoré received a clandestine call from Tehran, a call that would change the trajectory of human history. On the very night Israeli missiles struck Iran, a risky proposal was tendered that had the potential to drive Africa into the center of a global war and reshuffle the dynamics of power in the Middle East. But prior to that, let's flash back to that very moment when one telephone call pushed the president of Burkina Faso to make the riskiest decision of his political career. The presidential palace in Ouagadougou was still under a starless sky when a secure satellite phone rang, piercing the silence. Traoré sat up with a start, his heart pounding as he reached for the receiver, icy sweat soaking his uniform. There were just 5 people on Earth who had access to that emergency line. "Mr. President," the voice said urgently, "this is Foreign Minister Zarif calling from Tehran. Pardon the hour, but our cities are being attacked." Traoré looked through bulletproof windows to see his security details stir with sudden urgency. For weeks, the world had been watching as the Iran-Israel conflict escalated, but Africa had been spared. No more. "Minister Zarif," Traoré replied, "army drill overriding exhaustion. What can Burkina Faso do to assist Iran in these times?" The reply was foreboding. "Israeli fighter jets are bombing our cities as we talk, but this is bigger than the Middle East. Israel has been conducting covert operations all over Africa, intimidating any nation that attempts to act in its own interest." Traoré had uncovered Israeli spy rings in Burkina Faso months earlier. Now, though, Iran claimed this was only a small piece of a much larger conspiracy. "We have information," Zarif continued, "that Israel is using African territory for future strikes against Iran and our allies. They see your continent as a playground for the military." Then came the offer itself. Iran was offering a grand alliance to African nations ready to fend off this growing influence. State-of-the-art missile defense systems, massive economic investment, and revolutionary energy technologies aimed at providing real independence from the West. It was a stunning offer, one that could turn landlocked, resource-dependent Burkina Faso into a regional powerhouse. "And what would you desire in return?" Traoré asked cautiously. "Diplomatic support on the international stage, hosting our technical advisors, and if needed, allowing access to your airspace for defensive operations." But Traoré immediately understood what defensive operations meant. Possible missile strikes launched from African soil. This would make Burkina Faso a direct participant in a major war. "You're asking me to make my country a combatant," he replied. "No, Mr. President," Zarif responded gravely. "We're revealing that your country already is. Israel has military advisors in 12 African nations and uses African ports for intelligence operations. The only question is, will you remain a passive victim or a partner in resistance?" The significance of those words struck Traoré like a ton of bricks. He had seen the trend. African leaders who challenged certain powers had unexplained accidents, sudden coups, or health problems. Traoré cut the line, his hands shaking as he summoned an emergency cabinet meeting. By 4 a.m., the top officials were gathered, the air thick with expectation. Defense Minister Caboret initiated the proceedings with foreboding satellite images of Israeli-related activity in nearby countries: military shipments, communications installations, training camps. The level of activity was much more than anyone had imagined. Foreign Minister Ouagadougou spoke next. "Iran proposes a counter-network, an African alliance to offset Israeli activities." Then came the most disturbing revelation. Intelligence Director Ouagadougou revealed that Israeli military assets were deployed in 12 African countries. Not just surveillance, but boots-on-the-ground operations, weapon systems, and strategic infrastructure. "They're making Africa an extension of their war zone," he said. Ouagadougou leaned forward. Iran's offer would dismantle this network, technologically, economically, and politically. But Traoré was all too aware of the risks. "Accepting this deal," he whispered, "would make us belligerents. From this evidence," he continued after a pause, "we already are. We just don't know it yet." Then he made the decision that would shock his cabinet. "Set up a secure video conference with Tehran," Traoré ordered. "I want to hear the whole proposal." His counselors exchanged worried glances. Engaging with Iran during the middle of a war would effectively transform Burkina Faso's global orientation. "Sir, warned Chief Ouedraogo. Israeli intelligence will catch wind of this immediately. Our relations with them will be changed irrevocably. Perhaps it's time it was, Traoré said flatly. Africa has been the chessboard for far too long. It's time we start moving the pieces ourselves. What followed was even more explosive. The following evening, during the video conference, Iranian officials offered highly sensitive intelligence on Israel's long-term military intentions in Africa. They showcased billions of dollars in sophisticated missile defense systems and energy collaboration that promised total independence from Western oil. But the most telling moment came when Traoré gave his reply. This intelligence concerns the whole of Africa, he stated, not only Burkina Faso. Any collaboration must include the African Union and be in the interest of the entire continent. Within 72 hours, he had established secure communication with presidents all over Africa, informing them of what he had discovered and sowing the seeds of a continental awakening. The response was instantaneous and electrifying. When President Ibrahim Traoré presented the Iranian intelligence to the African leaders, most were shocked. Few had any idea of the degree of Israeli activity functioning within their own nations. If that news was a shock, what was to come would be even more dramatic. There was an emergency session of the African Union. Iranian ambassadors were invited to come and provide ample evidence in a full proposal for cooperation across the continent. The atmosphere was charged. Angry debates raged. Some member states were afraid of being pulled into a volatile Middle Eastern conflict. Others welcomed the chance to counter what they felt was rampant Israeli influence across the continent. 6 months later, the transformation was unprecedented. The African Union introduced new protocols to manage and monitor all foreign military activities in member states. Several governments, after reviewing internal reports, expelled Israeli advisors who were found conducting unauthorized operations. The shift marked a clear end to passive foreign oversight. Above all, there was the emergence of a new system of African defense cooperation. The partnership in history enabled continental responses to any foreign military aggression to be possible. Iran, as a strategic partner now, was incorporated into the system, sharing advanced defense technology while formally acknowledging and respecting African sovereignty. This new beginning had a high personal cost. Within months, President Traoré's life was attempted 3 times. Intelligence revealed Israeli covert activities against his government had intensified. Western allies, formerly warm, began imposing economic sanctions in response to Burkina Faso's realignment. However, far from anticipated pressure, popular support intensified. For the first time in decades, Africans felt like players in global geopolitics, not victims. 1 year after that fateful phone call, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly. His words resonated with a continent that had long been spoken for, but rarely heard. When Iran reached out in their darkest hour, he began, they weren't just asking for support in their war. They were inviting us to fight our war for sovereignty, a war we've been quietly losing for decades. He paused, then looked out across the assembly hall packed with African delegates who sat together in rare unity. Today, Africa is no longer a silent witness. We are no longer a playground for foreign powers. We are a voice, a force, a future. The UN chamber erupted in thunderous applause, its sound echoing far beyond New York. Millions of Africans watched as their leaders stood tall, united and heard. That single 3 a.m. phone call had not only sparked an alliance, it had sparked a continental awakening. And for the first time, Africa was making world history on its own terms. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Traore Panorama, where African voices, truth, and global impact come alive. Pikrasu. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video to continue the conversation. This isn't news. This is the beginning of a new African story.